Coming up on Mount Hermeneutics, the Watchers, angels, demons, Nephilim, mythology, lore. We're going to try to tackle all of that. So keep it right here.
I feel like you overpromised a bit, but
Bro, I know 5 fat people, and Michael Moore's 4 of those 5.
You know what I'm saying?
and he ate the other one.
Yeah. Again, the movie director, Michael Moore, not you, Dad.
Yeah. I feel like you overpromised a bit, but
You're listening to Mount Hermeneutics, where 3 Marines give their perspective on God, faith, and spirituality with a heavy lean on the Divine Counsel Worldview. This is not your grandma's Sunday school, nor is it always for the Christian faint of heart. Nothing about who we are or what we say make us experts. But you better believe we'll have a take, and perhaps it won't suck.
all right.
So what'd you guys do this week?
What did I do? Did some deep sea fishing.
Did you catch anything? Did you catch a Leviathan?
Caught an orca. Had some orca steaks afterwards. Speared them. We did it with snorkels and
I forgot about all the deep sea fishing in Oklahoma.
Well, you know,
We have airplanes.
there's a road trip. There's a road trip.
My San Diego sensitivities are offended, right? So, and my wife's affinity for orcas is also offended. You just made her sad.
She also likes to eat orca.
She likes to hug them. She's an orca hugger.
They eat baby seals.
They do.
They tear them apart while they're alive.
They kill things for fun.
Yeah,
they are mean, right? Like, is it because they're so intelligent and they're just maybe they're Nephilim?
Dolphins are pretty mean too.
Dolphins like to rape.
That's the word. Yeah, like they're not. They're sometimes they're nice to humans. Sometimes they're rapey. They're
like in The Boys. When my man's like talking to the dolphin, he's like, hey, no, come on, man. I'm not doing that. And the same with the octopus. The octopus was a little rapey too.
That was a little. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry I brought that up.
It's a little suspect.
That's on me. My bad. Yeah. So
I went to LA this weekend. Had to do some preliminary stuff as I'll be playing in the Academy Awards in a couple of weeks. So did you like accidentally find your razor blade or something? Yeah, I had to do that for because I'm supposed to be clean shaven for the event, and I had to take the credentials. So actually, I wasn't going to be completely clean shaven, but then when I was shaping it up, I screwed it up. So I had to.
You were going to do the mustache or whatever, and then you
I was going to
went too high on one side. You started
something.
chasing.
Yep, and then I'm like, goodbye.
During the pandemic, I tried to cut my own hair and wound up in a similar situation.
It's no good. Yeah. Lousy, no good.
I was bald for a little while.
Which, if you got the head, it's not that lousy. There's a market for it. I mean, it's that's what I hear. Anyways,
that's what guys that are bald tell themselves.
But yeah,
I got a nice shaped head.
So I was in Savannah, Georgia this week. Had a business trip, and my boss recommended I bring my wife along because we'd never been to Savannah. So we went, and it was an interesting experience. It's an interesting city. I recommend everybody should see it once. I bet it's really hot in the summer. So it was not hot. It was nice. Other than that, wasn't feeling great. I think I flew around the world and gave everybody Ebola. So if you got Ebola from me, my bad. The trip had to happen. It was really important. And
I was wondering why I was bleeding out of my eyes yesterday.
Yeah, that was me. That's on me.
Look, right on, man.
I apologize.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. Well, at least had it now. You don't have to worry about that again. You're probably
Ebola is a one-time thing.
I'm sure Pfizer's got something they can stick me with. Maybe
Probably.
AstraZeneca.
Probably.
I'm sure, and I'm sure it
Moderna.
wouldn't be worse than the actual disease too.
Right? Yeah.
Sure of that. I am sure of that.
Ask the Red Cross.
Yeah. I don't know about that one. But
Right.
but yeah, so that was my weekend. Like, I mean, I just got home on Sunday night, so we just got home back to work today. So yeah, that was that. But other than reading the book that got me kind of thinking about what we were just talking about, that was about it. But it brought up a lot of thoughts and questions. Like, one of the things in the book where Dre, you'll get a kick out of this. It references the Anunnaki also. So it talks about, this ruling party of demigods, watchers, fallen watchers, etc., and how these ones were this, and they kind of categorize them, and it kind of starts. It's funny because it almost does what my head did immediately the first time I really started crystallizing the thoughts around the divine council and the idea of Elohim existing and all that. I'm like, wait a minute. So if that's real, that this over here draw some parallel lines, and my brain I start looking like that meme with the chick and all the geometry symbols and the advanced math floating in front of her kind of thing. And I'm like, there's a whole lot of possibilities all of a sudden. And that was kind of what made me, when we were talking about, what to do on a show. And I was like, we could talk about the mythology around the Bible and all of the things that are brought into it, because it strikes me that even in the conversations we've had, we've talked about, some of the language that's used and some of the naming conventions and some of the implied understandings about things, and some of that mythology is necessary in order to rightly understand what some of the intention in some of the biblical scripture is, if that makes sense. And like, one of the points was, it was in the back of this book where this author, Brian Gadawa, and Brian, if I'm saying your last name wrong, I'm sorry. I'll tag you in this episode, so maybe you'll see the show. But he was talking about it's the section in his appendix where he's talking about the sons of God, and he's kind of explaining, justifying, making the case, if you will, for why Genesis 6 or Psalms 82 is talking about Elohim and not about humans. And he's referencing, I'm just going to find it quickly. He's referencing a verse where God says, I have no one beside me. I don't remember the exact quote, so if I can find it quickly, hopefully I can.
Isaiah 49, probably.
What's the quote?
There is no God beside me, no, not one.
Yeah, that one. That there's two other references in the Bible where other people make a similar statement. It was kings and emperors that they made the same kind of statements. And the point that this guy's making is that that wasn't God creating that language, that God was really quoting language that was common to the time, because that was a phrase that people would say to say, I'm better than my peers, or I'm better than these other things that aren't quite as good as me, which is a way to say that God wouldn't have said that if there weren't other Elohim that he was attempting to clearly distance himself from, which I thought was reasonable and made sense.
Isaiah 40 was the reference I was
Thanks.
thinking of.
And I don't know why. I thought it was right here. I thought I had it dog-eared, so I apologize for not having it in a way that was useful for this show, because I was moving around. I must have bumped my book and knocked the bookmark out of the way. It's not very useful for this show. But anyway, I thought that was one of the interesting points, where understanding that some of the writing in the Bible was done to make use of modern phraseology or modern language versus it being created specifically for the point that was trying to be made.
And I think we mentioned that kind of in our early episodes, how you know, the Bible was written for the time and for the audience that was reading it. And though, you know, it was written for us, but not necessarily to us. It was written to the people that would have been reading it, and they would have understood those references readily, unlike us who have to try to contemplate what that means and sometimes get it wrong because of our current world lens that we look at things through.
Yeah, there's a lot of ancient idioms in the Bible that we just kind of read it literally without understanding the baggage there. And we kind of project our own understanding onto it. Like a lot of the flat earth stuff, like it's you know, they assume the earth was flat, so it's written within that worldview, but it's not. But the point of the text is not that. It's sorry, I just hit my
yeah, no,
Right.
I think that's exactly it. The first time I heard Heiser make that statement that this wasn't meant to be a science book, right? It kind of helps ease some of that. But I think also we were talking about earlier, it goes back to, you know, what does inerrancy mean? Right. And I think that's one of those things that trips people up. My brother had called me out of the blue and was like, "Hey, you guys need to talk about flat earth." And I was like, "Why?" And he was mentioning that, you know, the stuff in Genesis about the firmament and all of that. He was like, you know, it's there. It's kind of hard to ignore it. And I was like, well, that depends on, you know, how the first step is you got to be willing to let go of some of these literal word for word things being a requirement in order to believe in the broader story of what's going on in the Bible. And he's like, "What you talk about, Willis?" Right. And it really kind of started that whole conversation where if you go into the Bible expecting to read it cover to cover and every single word is literally accurate, you're going to have a bad day, because you're going to have a really hard time reconciling some of this stuff. But if you go into it reading it from cover to cover from a perspective of, I want to read this to understand the broad messages and then start understanding and digging into the deeper messages, and that overall message is literally correct. It's a whole different way to read the Bible. And I think go ahead.
And when you read it in that context, and one, you're able to understand what it's saying, and you're first and foremost, you're able to understand what it's saying. But secondly, you understand that it is, a lot of it's not meant to be literal. Like the Genesis 1, it taught, if you read that on its own and insist that everything there is absolute literal truth, you wind up being believing the earth is flat and was created in 6 literal 24-hour days. Actually, you don't even get that if you pay close attention to the text. But
I'm like, I mean, when does it say that day was 24 hours? When does it say that?
Yeah, that's kind of why I corrected myself. And in fact, if you read the text, it precludes that, because there was no, he separated light from darkness to create day and night. Before this, he created the sun, moon, and stars. So there was no to be for signs and seasons and years. So there was no this idea of the earth rotating and the sun coming up in 24-hour cycles. That wasn't possible until day 4, according to the text. And it also leaves you believing that plant life existed prior to the sun, which even ancient people understood that's not possible, because they understood what happened in the winter when there's less sunlight. All the plants die. But if you read that in the context of other ancient Near Eastern literature, like it's like the creation stories are typically the very oldest creation stories are always about the sky god and the earth goddess. They come together, and from their union, these other deities are born, and those deities pair up and birth other personified forces of nature. Then at a later stage, the storm god typically gets promoted to the status of creator god, because if you're worshiping personified forces of nature and you believe that you're your fortune and your well-being is dependent on placating them. There's only so much time in the worship calendar. So you're going to focus your efforts on the storm god. And that's kind of a recurring pattern across all ancient religion. And then he gets promoted to the status of creator god by doing epic battle with some kind of chaos creature, a dragon typically. Slays the
Or
dragon.
was there some god that fought a dragon?
Well, hold on, I'm rounding my point here.
Okay.
Well, but what does our dragon represent in the ancient world? Yeah, whenever I mention like Atlantis as a real life thing, um, like like the
Like
recap structure in
like
Mauritania,
Graham Hancock's Atlantis.
right? People always think, oh, you're talking about mermaids and mermen and Aquaman and Submariner and stuff, and no, I'm not talking about an actual city that's operational under the ocean. I'm talking about an ancient city that was
Flooded.
yeah consumed by the water.
Yeah.
But yeah. So
I saw my buddy Mike Poost on Saturday night, and I mentioned Graham Hancock to him. He started banging his head on the table.
why?
Because he's like, man, and then because his wife is really into the Anunnaki. It's hilarious. She's like, I'm like, well, I mean, me too. She's like, really? I'm like, not really, but it's fun. And he's like, why are you getting her started? She's like, who? I'm like, Senshin. And then he's like,
you knew too much, and every time you kept her going, and he's like, Dre, why are you doing this?
I'm like, what's your problem with Senshin, man? Other than he's been debunked 1,000 times. He's like, my problem with Senshin is if you're going to quote ancient Sumerian texts, and I don't have a problem with that because they have their own stories, but you should be able to fucking read Sumerian. Fair. So if you can't read that text, don't comment on it, okay? That's all I'm saying.
Does that apply to the Bible too?
Well, the Bible's been translated, right?
Yeah, but I actually so there's I don't remember if I shared the meme into our chat or not.
Because I'm working on that, by the way.
But there was this meme that I saw, and it was like, the Bible can't both be infallible, be inspired, and be translated, because either the original text was inspired, which means a translation is just a reference to the original inspiration, or you're going to tell me that every translation was equally inspired as it was translated. And I was like, yeah.
I don't
because you can't translate word for word. You have to make word
changes.
An
interpretation.
You have to interpret some things. You have to make a point. And that point, that translation, as you're making the point, is not inspired.
Well, the question is it the message that's inspired or the medium that's inspired? Like, there's nothing inspired about,
which gets to the concept of infallibility.
Right. I saw where Matt was going with this.
Because the way, and this is my point, the message of the Bible is infallible. The theology that's presented in the Bible is infallible. I'm 100% on board with that. The Bible is not word for word infallible. The Bible is not inerrant. The Bible is chock full of errors. The sum total of the Bible is inerrant. There's a difference between those two things. And when the average Christian has a starting position of the Bible is infallible and inerrant, and you must read it literally, word for word, you're already set up for disappointment and failure.
Yeah, and I think their epistemology is upside down to begin with. And it just kind of like they start out reading it devotionally and like reading it as if this is the word of God. God is saying this to me, therefore everything in it is true. And you can't get there. You have to start out reading it. You have to read it critically and from a philosophically neutral position, investigate it, and then when you determine that it's historically reliable, then you conclude that it's divinely inspired. But you can't start out there.
Right.
I mean, once you've concluded that, then you can read it devotionally. I'm not saying it's wrong to read it devotionally. I'm saying it's wrong epistemologically to start with that.
I was in a an apologetics thread, and there was a conversation somewhat to this point, and this other guy made a comment that I really liked. He said, I'm trying to see if I can find it real quick. That was weird. Basically, he said, he says, the Bible being inerrant in the way that I was talking about, YEC and ELT are some of the biggest reasons that set people up to become atheists and leave Christianity. And I said,
What's EL?
Eternal living torture.
Oh, eternal conscious torment.
Yep. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Maybe it was ECT. Maybe that's what it was, and I transposed it in my head. It was probably that. And then I said, you forgot Calvinism. He goes, oh yeah, you're right. Good catch. Add that to my list.
Does everyone hate Calvinism?
Bro,
I think
Not
everybody
enough.
does.
not enough.
Because
And the
Stephen
problem
Crowder
is,
shit on Calvinism the other day. They made me laugh.
what did he say?
I'm trying to remember. He did it using Trump's voice. That's what stood out to
That's
me. I'm
pretty
gonna have to
funny.
go back and check it out.
I
He's
want to
like,
hear Trump crapping on Calvinism.
it's not what I said, but it's already predetermined that you're gonna lose, Nikki Haley. That's Calvinism joke for you. Like, wow,
Mm.
But
pretty fun.
Yeah,
I thought it was a funny exchange that this random guy in this apologetics made those comments, and I was like, add Calvinism, and I was waiting to see him come back and be like, actually, no, tulip is sound and blah blah.
Instead, he was like,
yeah, he was like, my man, good looking out.
the problem is so many people are influenced by Calvinism, but don't consider themselves Calvinist.
That's
But
because they don't. Because they don't
Because
really
it's so
know what
conflated
Calvinism
with everything
is.
else.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But they're like the thing that we've been talking about does regeneration precede faith, or does faith precede regeneration? And you hear I've had countless conversations with people who don't regard themselves as Calvinists, who have the same disdain for it that we do. But then you talk about apologetics and evangelism, and they'll say, oh well, it's not our job to convince people. That's the Holy Spirit's job. Well, wait a minute. How does where does the Bible say that, for one thing? And two, how does the Holy Spirit convince them? And they kind of appeal to this. It's just this mystery that they appeal to. And that's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that, by example, at least, that the Holy Spirit, he only acts in the world through people. He has to be embodied. And that's where the church comes in. Like this idea that to say it's not our job, it's the job of the Holy Spirit, is to miss the point of the church. If it's the Holy Spirit's job, it is our job, because
right. It's almost like abdicating responsibility of the work.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't got to do all that dirty work. That's for that disembodied dude to come behind me and do that.
And it speaks of faith as something that just sort of happens to someone. Like if you read every sermon in the New Testament or in the entire Bible, every prophet, every apostle, every preacher, every sermon by Jesus, they are imploring people to respond to what they've heard. Brothers, save yourselves from this corrupt generation, Peter says in Acts chapter 2, after he receives the Holy Spirit and tells them, that he teaches them that Jesus is the Messiah because of the resurrection. The Israelites answer, brothers, what shall we do? And then Peter says, repent and be baptized, and you will receive the promised Holy Spirit. So you have to believe first, and then you have the Spirit to regenerate you. You don't get the Spirit first in order to have faith, but people speak as if that's the case. And is it any wonder that Christianity is dying in the West when God has told us we have a job to do, and we say, no, that's God's job. We're gonna sit this out. We're just gonna watch it happen. So anyway,
especially now that I know my ancestors fought fucking giants, we better get with the program.
Right?
It's like the whole Old Testament's about us fighting giants. Like that's the whole war. Yeah. Like Joshua and the boys were like running around. Caleb, I'm not afraid. Let's go kill some giants. I'm like, what? And I think
Yeah.
what makes it so cool is that it's they just mention it so casually. Yeah, then there was like giants. And then we had like David like hit one, like cut his head off, and it was, whatever. Like as if it was completely understood back then that there was giants and
That's
everyone knew it.
that's part of the part that I think is really crazy. Is it's like they're like, oh yeah, the giants, and everybody's like, oh yeah, the giants. It is like they don't want to spend time talking about it because everybody knows about it.
We read it 5,000 years later. We're like, what the fuck? There was giants?
Right.
Sorry, what do you mean there was giants? What is it? Whoa.
Half the fun of the book is just it's stuff that, isn't in existence anywhere. So it's all like net new story. Like, Noah fighting the Leviathan. That didn't happen in the Bible, but in this book it did. So it was fun to read about. But then it's like, how much of this is even actually biblically sound versus 100% made up? You know what I mean? Like they reference these past wars, and that there was what do they call it? The Titanomachy.
Yeah. The war between the Olympians and the Titans.
That's what we know it as, but they keep referencing it as this war that happened back when the first uprising happened, and the angels and the fallen angels and giants were all fighting each other. So it's like in this, there was two distinct wars. There was the Titanomachy, and then there was another one. I forgot what it was called because I didn't bookmark it, and I was traveling and whatever while I was reading it. But yeah, it's pretty wild. And then at the end of it, the three. So there were four archangels that are mentioned in the book. It was Uriel, Michael, Gabriel, and who's the other one? Raphael. Thank you.
Raphael.
Yeah. So Uriel was the first one that shows up, right? And he only shows up because he's the guardian angel of Noah, because Noah is decreed as being, they call him the seed of man, and he's going to be the thing that allows God to kill all the fallen watchers, or to deal with it. It doesn't say kill.
He's a messianic prototype.
Right. And so because of that, Uriel is sent down to guard him and keep him from dying. So then at some point, Uriel has to blow his horn, and everybody's like, the hell did you do that for? He's like, oh, I wasn't doing it for this. You guys will see what I just did. And then the other three archangels show up, and they just start. I mean, Uriel was a bad dude by himself, but three of them, and Uriel's not the best of them, but the whole
corn pop.
This story, yeah, this whole story is just it's really, I was surprised at how well done it was. To take something as out there as, the DCW stuff. I mean, this is literally a fan fiction novel of the DCW. That's what it is. So anybody that's listening that is intrigued in this DCW concept, the author is Brian Gadawa, and it's called the Noah Primeval. And then the next book is Enoch Primeval. And then so it goes backwards, and then it goes back forward, and then the last book in the series is Jesus.
It goes way up.
Yeah. Is the last book out?
Yeah, the whole series is published. And then he has another series called there's an Apocalypse series that he did, which I'm guessing is kind of like his version of the Left Behind, which, if it's anything like these, is going to be lit. Because this is literally the 300, only biblical. Like there's some pretty sick battle sequences in it.
Nice.
So I found I found the verse I was looking for real quick, Brian. It was Deuteronomy 32 39. Deuteronomy 39. God says, see now that even I am he, and there is no Elohim beside me. Right. And then
Okay.
the point that this guy's referencing is then in Isaiah 47:8, the power of Babylon says, I am, and there is no one beside me. And then in Zephaniah 2:15, the city of Nineveh, the leader boasted, I am, and there is no one else. And the point is, he calls this sloganeering, is his language that this
Gotcha.
author's using. And I'm quoting him now, and he says, obviously, they're not saying that there are no other powers or cities that exist beside them, because they had to conquer other cities and rule over them. And so the point is it was just the language that was being used, and people will jump to that and go, see, there's no other Elohim. It's like
the king said, I'm him.
Right. He said, ain't nobody else. I'm the guy. Yeah, I'm the only one. Yeah. But
I'm him.
But I just thought that was an interesting point, the way he describes a lot of this in the back end of this book. But Brian, you were talking. I don't know if you were done with your
fighting the chaos monster.
Yeah. Right. So in pagan mythology, you have this intermediate stage where the storm god slays the dragon. Like in Hinduism, you have the hymn of, in the Vedas, you have Indra slaying Vitra. You have Marduk slaying Tiamat in Babylonian mythology, Baal slaying Yam or Leviathan, Zeus slaying Typhon, Thor slaying Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, and then from their carcass fashioning the earth. And that's how the storm god is regarded as the creator god. In the Bible, so when you read the Bible in that context, one, you have Genesis 1, where rather than doing battle or having sex with another personified force of nature, God is above and beyond and transcends nature. He merely speaks it into existence. Nothing resists his will, so he orders it according to his will. He speaks and it's done. There's no drama, there's no chaos to quell, there's no battle to be had. It's just nature obeys him because it's subservient to him, and it's happy to do it, and at every stage it is good, and at the end it's very good. But then later on, in the Psalms and in some of the prophets, you have reference to God slaying the Leviathan, which modern readers might take literally, that there was some demonic force or an actual dragon that God slayed at some point that's not specified elsewhere in the Bible. Well, no, it's a polemic against that language about Baal slaying Yam or Leviathan, saying, no, God is the creator. God is the one who overcomes chaos. It has nothing to do with God fighting and slaying a literal dragon. It has to do with God overcoming what they regarded to be the symbol of chaos. So it's and again, it's a polemic against that kind of language about their storm god being the creator god. It's a rebuttal saying, no, it's God to whom this imagery applies, not your idols. So
what's weird about the stuff, and again, in this book, Leviathan plays a part, so it's really interesting. But it's weird in that Leviathan does exist in the Bible, right? Like, it's a strange thing that he just jumps out and there's like a whole chapter of Job dedicated to it. And then there's nothing else talked about it again, right? Like, it's this reference to it, and then it just goes away, kind of like the giants. It's like the Bible's like, I mean, it's not like Leviathan matters, right? Anyway, they were like, excuse me, what is this Leviathan, and where did it come from, and where did it go?
But in Job, it's just an animal of creation like any other. Whereas in pagan mythology, it's this cosmic chaos creature that threatens the order of creation, and that a great heroic figure like Baal has to slay.
So this guy makes a point that it's Leviathan that's then reimagined or readapted for Revelation, right? Because Leviathan's a 7-headed sea dragon, And then in Revelation, it's a 7-headed dragon. So it's almost like Leviathan's come back, even though we're all aware that Leviathan in Revelation is I don't know what the right word is.
So let me ask this.
It's a callback to Satan at this point, right? Which
it's a
callback. Kind of sort didn't exist in the Old Testament, and now Satan exists in the New Testament, and it's embodying.
But it's kind of a description of the Watchers and the Fallen as well, too, right? So you've heard it posited that actual seraphim were the type of angels that fell. And they have kind of a serpent face, they got wings, they in fact like 6 wings. So this whole motif of the lizard people and those types of things comes from the Watchers. So if there were creatures that did come down and do these things, it's kind of like the it represents something in some of these other myths, but they were actual creatures. If you take Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and split them in different kind of creation narratives, that the terms so they dinosaurs, old creatures, things that were before Adam was placed in the garden. There might have been an entire list of animals and creatures and things that had cataclysms and death and rebirth and things of that nature.
The dragon in Revelation, it does connect to the chaos creatures of pagan mythology, but more immediately it connects to the 4 beasts in Daniel, where he has in Daniel 7 he has his vision where he has the vision of the lion with the wings that represents the Babylonian Empire. That was their actual sigil, like the gates of Babylon has a winged dragon. I mean a winged lion. Then it's followed by a bear that's raised up on one side. It has 3 ribs in its mouth that represents the Median and Persian Empire. That was kind of that was 2 peoples in one. And then you have the 4-headed leopard, which represents Alexander, the Macedonian Greek Empire. After he died, his empire was parceled out to 4 generals, representing the 4 heads. And then you have the final beast, which isn't described in terms of any existing animal. It's just a great, terrifying beast with iron claws and teeth.
America.
Maybe.
America.
It understood to represent the Roman Empire because it was the 4th empire after the Greek Empire. And then arguments could be made that America is a revived Roman Empire and therefore the beast in Revelation. But then it was after the 4th beast that he had his vision at night, and in his vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man coming on the clouds of heaven. That's another bit of language from pagan mythology. Baal was said to be the one who rides on the clouds. More polemic language to say no, it's Yahweh who rides on the clouds.
Are you saying there was never a Baal? Because I think there was. I think that you have these idols and these sacrifices, but if you had these nations that were led by these I think they're called terrible ones even throughout the Bible, that they actually were sacrificing their kids to these beasts and Nephilim creatures that actually ate. So like Marduk and Baal, and I think they were creatures that actually existed.
So like in what sense? Like was it
it's a demigod. It's a creature
like Watchers or fallen sons of God of some sort.
Yeah, some sort of sons of God. I'm not they're created beings. And also there's like language where the flood, where God destroys the things that he created. And if you want to get legalistic, he didn't create all the Nephilim. The Nephilim were created by something else.
Right.
So there was antediluvian and post-diluvian type Nephilim, which is why the battle had to continue. And perhaps there still is.
Well, it says
Do
so,
you
right?
remember?
It says
Do you remember?
then
Do you remember the
and
girl with
also
6 fingers
Yeah.
at Fort Huachuca?
Yeah, she was in Pensacola too. The blonde girl in
Yeah,
the Air
she was really
Force.
pretty.
Yeah, she was beautiful.
But
I had a thing for her.
I'm telling you that the angels, they enticed these women in because they were so beautiful, and I think it's even mentioned. There's even described of 6 digits on one of these Nephilim. She was a Nephilim. I don't.
So
Hello,
what like
my name
I
is
want
Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
to circle back to what makes you think that Baal was it like I want to define this more. Like what when you say he existed, was he like a person who like a historical person who was deified, or
No,
was
I,
he
I
No,
think I think he was an Elohim,
I think he's a Nephilim. He
or
was
maybe not a Nephilim. Like I don't
but
know that. I don't think Nephilim is the right taxonomy. To be honest, I think he was an Elohim. I think he was
you
a
think he was
son of God.
he was one of the watchers on the
Mhm.
Divine
yes,
Council?
Yeah.
or
Like so
the son of one of those. So maybe a generation back, but I think that these gods, quote unquote, were creatures that were bigger and
Okay,
stronger.
so
And
let's throw a quick disclaimer for anybody who's joining us new to the show. So let me do this really rough, and Brian, if you want to clean up what I say, um, if you're joining us for the first time and you hear us throwing the word God around loosely, before you become alarmed, or if you're still here, hopefully, and you haven't turned us off yet, we're using the lowercase g term when we say God. So we're talking about is no different than we were talking about, the Egyptian gods, etc. So the premise behind the Divine Counsel Worldview, which is a point of view that was coined by Dr. Michael Heiser, but it's not something new, and he didn't invent this idea. He kind of coined the terminology. In Genesis 6, when 6:4 specifically, it talks about watchers that were angels of sorts. There's some type of pantheon of God, of the the host of heaven is one of the phrasings used in the
yeah,
Bible a
well,
lot.
the exact wording in Genesis 6 is in those days men began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them. And the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and took of them as wives any of whom they chose. Then God said then the Lord said, my spirit will not strive with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. Now the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God went into the daughters of men and had offspring by them. These are the warriors of old, the Gaborim, the men of renown. And then it said that then God says he observes that man's wickedness was great on the earth, and his thoughts were only evil all the time, and that's when he decided to flood the earth. So that's the exact wording, but we're the premise of the Divine Counsel Worldview is that the Book of Enoch, or First Enoch, as it's called, because there were later ones that came after in the late antiquity, early medieval era. It kind of it preserves this commonly held understanding of the background there, that these beings called watchers, identified as the sons of God, angels, they descended on Mount Hermon and swore a pact to do this. And it kind of expands on it, and it explains that it was because of this and their corruption of mankind by disseminating corrupting forbidden knowledge, and also the Nephilim roaming the earth and wreaking havoc. This is what led to the flood. So sorry, did that fill in the blanks that you were
That I
didn't mean to hijack it.
I hadn't stopped creating yet. No, it's fine. That was exactly what I was going to say, more or less, without the quote. But yeah, so for anybody that's listening, this is what we're talking about right now. We're kind of having a free form discussion around some of where it's mythology versus real, because the edges are kind of soft and chewy on the edges around this topic, because the Bible only speaks to very little of this with specificity. And it's very common for a lot of Christian readers. They say, well, the Bible doesn't talk about it, so I'm not going to get into it. And that's precisely the stuff that we find the most interesting, is where it might, there's some room for understanding or analysis, or a little bit of a deeper critical read into that. And then this is why we're talking about kind of catching us back up to back to the conversation, this is why we're talking about a lot of the ancient Near Eastern mythology that was well understood at the time by biblical writers. And so sometimes it feels as if the writers are kind of talking around a topic, because they are. There's topics, categories of stories. The entire book of Enoch seems to be well known by biblical writers, and so they'll reference it. Christ references it, right? Like, it's talked about without quoting specifically and saying all these things are true and happen within it. So it's all worth. I just wanted to take a quick second just to kind of circle back around to make sure anybody that was a new or casual listener kind of understood what in the wide world of sports we were talking about when we keep talking about all these gods. And just to be clear, biblically in the ancient language, they used Elohim. That's what the Bible tends to use, specifically the Septuagint, and a lot of the earlier books. And that word means God, lowercase g, right? So they use that word is used not in the place of angels more often than not. Now, the word angel is used also specifically when they're talking about a messenger, but not all of the other hosts of heaven, right? But that phrasing is used in the Bible, and it references the totality of the inhabitants of heaven, which is all of the what we would call angels in loose English,
Right.
common language.
And Elohim is any kind of spirit being.
Basically not a human, not a mortal.
Well, but when Samuel was raised by the witch at Endor in 2 Samuel, the story is King Saul had rebelled against God. God had replaced him with David. It was on the eve of his final battle with the Philistines before he and his son were killed. He went to the witch at Endor because the prophet Samuel had died, and he wanted guidance from Samuel. So he had a medium, a witch, summon him from the other side, and it says it describes him as an Elohim, is the point. Not that he was a god, but he was a spirit, and which of course raises questions about the afterlife. We're always talking about how the Bible is not about dying and going to heaven as a disembodied spirit. I hold to that. This does introduce a wrinkle.
Interesting.
But it's not insurmountable, and it's maybe a topic for another time. But just the point here is that an Elohim is any kind of spirit being, not necessarily. God is called Elohim in the singular sense, but Elohim plural also exist.
Right. And it's this great language that has no differentiation between the singular and the plural. So you have to use context and understand what's being written to know which version. Yeah.
Just like English words like fish or moose or sheep.
Unfortunately, we use none of those to describe supreme deities.
But when we talk about, salvation and heavenly and afterlife, usually we're referring to ourselves as humans. So with the just quick sleep and then you're resurrected, I don't think that applies to, like, say, the Nephilim, who get no rest, right? Like, they're disembodied spirits, and maybe some of this Eastern culture with karma and living multiple lives and soul and inhabiting other bodies, maybe that's for them, and not necessarily us.
There's an interesting tangential theory, Dre, that I don't know if you just invented, but you just brought to mind. Is it possible that anybody who has visions or memories of of previous existences, and that they think they've been reincarnated, are in fact Nephilim, and they've forgotten that they were originally Nephilim, and that's why their souls can't sleep whenever they die, and they just keep getting put back into bodies again?
And the guy Gary Wayne was talking about it, because they asked him, like, hey, so are there such thing as a good Nephilim? And he said, yeah, I don't know why there wouldn't be. Like, you get to make a choice whether you were created this way or that way, or you're one of us, you still have a choice. You can follow God or not. And though it'd be harder for them, but by their nature and their
Right.
hearts and all the things,
The deck
but
is
if you,
stacked against them.
or maybe if you came back 17 times and figured it
You
out,
were
right?
like, man, I'm trying here. Like,
Yeah. So you're not necessarily still following, when my man Shimi Haza at Mount Hermon, you like broken your pack and now you're back with God. And is God really a merciful God for all his creation, or is that just for Adam's descendants?
it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, it's all we can do is speculate. I would just
Of course.
just for some background for the listeners, according to the Book of Enoch, the demons that are being driven out in the Book of Enoch explains that demons are disembodied Nephilim because they're hybrids, because they're half human, half angel. They are their spirits are intrinsically immortal, unlike ours. Um, but they don't belong in the heavenly realm. They don't belong. That they're bound to the earth. So when they die, their spirit doesn't have anywhere to go. So they seek embodiment in humans. And so these are the beings that Jesus was interacting with when he was driving them out, and they're screaming at him, are you here to torture us before the appointed time? And he
Like,
casts
hey,
He was like,
and they're pleading with him not to cast them into the abyss, which is in the ancient worldview is conceived of as being geographically below the earth. Like in the Book of Enoch, the Watchers who rebelled on Mount Hermon, they were put in literal holes in the ground with boulders that covered them up. And so and it has a lot of parallels to the Titanomachy
right.
of Greek mythology, of the gods of Olympus overthrowing the Titans, the earlier generation of gods, and locking them in Tartarus until the end of history. And then that's how and the last of them was the dragon Typhon, a hydra, a many-headed. No, well, the hydra was Hercules, but the Typhon was similar in that it's a many-headed dragon, much like in the Book of Revelation. But speaking to the mythological aspect, and what's interesting is, so a lot of this stuff that Michael Heiser talks about that makes up the Divine Counsel Worldview. He cites a paper called "On the Origin of Watchers." I got it in front, by Amar Anus. The full name is, sorry, "On the Origin of Watchers: A Comparative Study of the Antediluvian Wisdom in Mesopotamian and Jewish Traditions." It was published in 2010, and he basically explains how this incident in Genesis 6 is as the Book of Enoch elaborates, it's a polemic against Babylonian belief that there were these beings called the Apkallus, and through several layers of translation, one of the translations is watchers. There were these sages who descended from heaven and gave all of this forbidden knowledge to humanity, and the Babylonians credited their success as an empire to the magic and metallurgy and secrets of warfare and other secret knowledge that was given to them by the Apkallus. And the point of Anus's paper is that what you find in the Bible is kind of a parody and ridicule of that. What the Babylonians celebrated as a benefit to their civilization, the Jews saw as a corrupting influence. Now, Amar Anus is not, he's a scholar. He wasn't writing as if he believed any of it. He was just kind of tracing what he regarded to be the cultural in the cross-pollination of cultures here. And so it would be easy to read that and to read the Bible in light of other ancient Near Eastern religions and think that it was all just kind of a local conversation. Like it's just an academic point about some commonality between what the Bible teaches and what you find in the surrounding cultures. To me, what gets really interesting is when you look at, we talk about that Netflix series, Ancient Apocalypse, all the time, but with Graham Hancock, where he looks at all of these other ancient civilizations and these monolithic structures in Indonesia and in Central America and elsewhere, and the lore attached to these structures, it has a lot of common elements to what we've been talking about here. Like there's the people at the time were there was this interaction between humans and these divine beings who gave them knowledge. One of the gods became angered for whatever reason and then flooded the world, and then like the Great Pyramid of Cholula was constructed as a monument with the help of these giants in order to placate that god. And there's another pyramid in Indonesia with a similar story. It's not always the same story, but and the good guys and bad guys are mixed up. Who were seen as beneficial to humanity, who are the troublemakers and the enemies of mankind. That's kind of different, but you have all of these common elements of divine beings and giants. Sometimes the divine beings are different than the giants, sometimes they're the same, but they're interacting with humans, they're bestowing this information, which makes me think they're all talking. This is something that happened in actual history. I don't know that I agree with Dre that there's a spirit being who is called Baal by the other Elohim, but
I don't think they called him Baal.
I don't think he was a spirit being. I think he was God, a demigod, and that sacrificed to people and ate them and was gigantic and ruled the land. So I mean, knowing that the places were all given to the nations were divided and they were ruled, and then you have the Sumerian text that gives a whole lineage of Anunnaki who ruled some of them for 1,000 years. A kingly line. Then it goes to say that it tells me that there was at least some kind of continuity in different cultural centers that had the same type of influence, and since they all sprung up seemingly the same time around the world, and then how easy would it be? I mean, just if the sun decided to burp tomorrow and knocked out every single piece of electronics, and then there was a cataclysm where half of us died, we'd be blasted back to the Stone Age.
Yeah,
we would lose every single bit of technology that we've come up with that has accelerated the last 100 years. So we took thousands of years to get to this point, and then 100 years to get to the point where we are now, and we just keep on advancing. It would take a week before we're back to medieval times,
unless we all build giant Faraday cages over our house.
Right. So why, especially when you look at some of those temples and the size of the stones, and there had to be some kind of cutting technology, some kind of movement technology, and able to create these things that we can't even do today, right? And I don't know if they're aliens, but they're definitely not human. We'll say that. And then and with that, all of these myths and lore, maybe they're conflated, but it sounds like that kind of stuff actually happened.
I would go a step further than to say they were the Nephilim or flesh and blood. I take the the falling action of the Tower of Babel very literally, right? And the
Sure.
scattering and the numbering of the nations to the sons of God to be very literal. Um,
We should I'm not sure that background has been
yeah,
explained.
go
But
ahead.
do you want to?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, in Deuteronomy 32, 7-9, let me bring it up real quick because I don't have that exactly
I just had
memorized.
it in front of me also.
It's very unprofessional. I apologize.
Well,
So this
we
is the
didn't know
Song
we
of
didn't know we were going to
Moses.
get there. So
Yeah. So in Deuteronomy 32, Moses is kind of given his last one of his last discourses to the Israelites before they enter their promised land. He dies. It's the Song of Moses. Part of it says, "Remember the days of old, consider the generations long past. Ask your father, and he will tell you, your elders, and they will explain to you. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided all mankind," and this is a reference to the Tower of Babel incident, "he set up boundaries for the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. For Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage." So this is kind of a summary of Genesis 1-12.
well, so and so I've got a couple of others that just tied directly to that, right? So there's that one, and then just not too long after, actually before. So before that one in Deuteronomy 29:26, it says they went and served other gods and worshiped them, gods whom they had not known and whom he had not allotted to them. Right. So that one's relevant because it says not allotted to them. So that's to imply that they were worshiping gods that God Elohim that the Elohim had not told them to worship. Right.
It seems like some powerful beings were just poaching.
Then Daniel 10:10. Okay. 10-18.
Well, hold on just a second. Let me I think this part bears a little more explanation.
Okay. Go ahead.
Because the Tower of Babel, there's a lot of, like we talked about how the Nephilim, they're called the warriors of old, the Gibborim, the men of renown. In the book of Enoch, the leader of the Watchers who descend to the leader is a guy named Shemihaza, which means the face of the name. It has the same connotation as men of renown. The Hebrew for that is Enosh Hashem, which means men of the name. Shemihaza means the face of the name, the name, the face of the name. No, Shem is name, the name of the face, but it's the same connotation of fame and renown. Fast forward to Nimrod, who is the founder of the kingdoms of Akkad and Shinar and Babel. So would have been the Tower of Babel project would have been his idea. He's described as a Gabor, as a mighty warrior, a mighty hunter before Yahweh. And then the purpose of the Tower of Babel project was so that they are not scattered across the face of the earth, which God had commanded, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. So they're supposed to scatter, they're supposed to multiply, they're supposed to fill the earth. They're in defiance of that. But in building the Tower of Babel, this is understood to be a ziggurat. In fact, the ziggurat of Etemenanke, which is like a major landmark in ancient Babylon, this was understood to be the basis for this story. So they're building a ziggurat. Ziggurats are man-made sacred mountains. They see mountains as sacred because they're meeting points between heaven and earth, which is what Mount Hermon was. It was a sacred mountain, regarded to be sacred because of this incident in Genesis 6, where the Watchers descended upon it to mingle with humanity. So what that boils down to is that the Tower of Babel was an attempt to reinstate the arrangement of Genesis 6. Like they were in Genesis 6, the Watchers descended and they seduced and corrupted mankind. In Genesis 11, when they tried to build the tower, it was mankind chasing after them, seeking the favor of these gods because they wanted they looked back to the time before the flood. There's this time of advanced civilization and technology and wisdom, and it was this kind of golden age they wanted to
Because it
return
was.
to, which there's indication that it was.
Right.
Atlantis, as Plato described it, is an example of that. This Atlantis wasn't the name of the city. The city was the capital of an empire called Atlantis. And there's a whole bunch of stuff we could say about that. Look up the YouTube channel Bright Insights. Their whole thing is about how the Rakat structure in the Sahara, it's called the Eye of the Sahara. They make a pretty interesting case that actually is the lost city of Atlantis. And if you look at it from Google Maps, just look at it. It looks like a flood swept through what is now the Sahara Desert and wiped away something that was, and it's like this big smudge of sand that looks like a big wave of water went over northern Africa, and that's where the Rakat structure, the Eye of Mauritania, is. Looks just like how Plato described Atlantis.
The whole interlocking circle, concentric circles, and all that stuff.
Right.
So,
but,
so
the part in Deuteronomy 32 where it talks about how God numbered the nations according to the number of the sons of God, it's a reference to Genesis 11 when he scattered them, basically because they sought the favor of these lesser gods. God gave humanity over. He disinherited humanity, giving them over to them. And
I think that's where Matt was going.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting.
Yeah, I think it's
that it actually happened. It's not this like kind of sort of, maybe there is a few people, but this is going back to the point of this is all linked back to you asked a question up to Dre about, do you think Baal was real? And he was like, yeah. So I go a little further, and I just read this recently. So in Daniel 10, okay, 10 chapter 10, but down verse 10 through 18 specifically. I'm not going to read the whole thing because I actually hate when people do that. But the point here is I'm going to just read a couple of little excerpts. So Daniel's dealing with a battle, and there's been a war that's going on, and an angel appears to him. And it says, a hand touched me and set me on my hands and knees and said to me, Daniel, you're of great value. Understand the words that I'm about to speak to you. And then Daniel starts shaking. He says, don't be afraid. From the very first day you applied your mind to understand and to humble yourself before God, your words were heard. But then he's going on and he's talking about how, however, the prince of the kingdom of Persia has been opposing me for 21 days. But Michael, one of the leading princes, came to help me because I was left there with the kings of Persia. This goes on. The point of this excerpt is that there are kings and leaders in Persia that are fighting with angels, which is a really strange thing to think about if you think about it in just like
because they were like fisher kings, right? They were priestly kings. They were gods.
Exactly right. They were either, some type of fallen watcher, a lower level Elohim of some sort, that had empowered and were leading people under the auspice of being a human, right? Because I mean, this is one of those things where I just go, regular people aren't going to do very well fighting against angels,
right.
Unless the people leading the people are not people, right?
Right.
So what makes you think? So when the angel speaks to Daniel and he says, I was resisted by the prince of Persia and nobody helped me, except your prince, the great prince Michael. And he says that the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece opposed him.
This one doesn't say Greece, but that's fine.
I think that is in
it's a translation
10.
thing. It's fine.
But there is mention of the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece opposing this messenger sent to Daniel. Nobody hated him except your great Prince Michael. What makes you think any of the princes discussed there are like human, are on the human level?
I don't necessarily think any of them are.
He doesn't. That's the point.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
I misunderstood you.
Yeah,
I thought
my
you were...
point
Yeah,
is,
he's saying the opposite of that.
My point is, reading this from the DCW lens, anytime I hear the word prince or leader or king, I question the humanity of the person, of the subject of the sentence, right? My point is, the average reader is reading this going, oh yeah, Prince of Persia. I've seen movies about it. There's video games about it. He's a bad dude. He's corn pop. Like, of course he could be a bad dude, but he ain't bad enough to fight an angel. Like,
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when you start thinking about it in those terms, and you're realizing that this time period, there was supernatural activity all over the landscape on both sides of the coin, right? There were angels out doing things. I mean, there was literally a supernatural war that was going on, both from full frontal warfare. There were also demons running around pretending to be humans and currying favor and leading men astray. There was all kinds of wild shit going on. And
I mean, they had to drive them out to get to their promised land.
right.
They had like the giant wars.
Mm-hmm.
I think Moses and Joshua together like killed the last. I think they mentioned that King Og was the last original Nephilim, right? Like,
I just read a thing that the last supposed actual giant was only killed 700 years ago.
Well, but then the other giants were lesser. They were kind of lesser giants, right?
Yeah.
The
They were
Raphaim.
shrinking in giantness.
So it's interesting to me that these giants would understand that they have to kind of make a stand. So they like laid in wait for the Israelites to show up so that they can finally dispose of them, because they're the link that's gonna cleanse the earth and all the atonement stuff. The Messiah is gonna come from this lineage of people. So it looks as though the giants were kind of laying in wait, and that's when with the scouts that looked at the Amorites or the Philistines and saying, hey, these guys are big, and Caleb's like, don't worry about it, we're good.
Well, the Philistines came later, but they did have Nephilim or descendants of Nephilim among them. Goliath obviously is one of them. Og, king of Bashan. I would agree that it's implied that he's one of the last of the Rephaim, the descendants of like he's definitely one of them,
right?
Well, the defendant of the Nephilim. First he's King Og of Bashan. Bashan is that's the region where Herman
is. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's the one with the big bed, right?
Right. Yeah.
The gigantic bed.
He's described as having this giant iron bed, which Michael Heiser points out. I haven't been able to find this myself.
I'm not sure that,
but
I agree with Heiser on this.
I don't think Heiser is going to make this up, but he points out that the dimensions of Og's iron bed are the same dimensions as the sacred bed of Marduk, which was at the pyramid, the ziggurat of Etemenanki.
He
might have been the same size as Marduk,
but he could have been pulling that from like Ugaritic text or from Enoch or Jubilee or something. Like Heiser wasn't afraid to go out of from Sola Scriptura to find information.
I'm not disputing the accuracy of it. It's just not something that I've been able to personally verify. So I'm just going to quote him and trust that he what he was talking about.
Even Josephus wrote about giants, and he even mentions that they're still on display. So that would have been first century. Like there's large bones in these giants that were fought off in our antiquity, and these bones are still on display today. Josephus writes that.
Yeah, giants were definitely a major part of the ancient worldview. Like I don't know that Augustus Caesar was known to collect dragon bones were they like dragons, and I think the distinction is it's a distinction without a difference, but dragons are dinosaurs.
Hey, Brian.
So,
Actually, the King Og's bed,
yeah,
it's in Deuteronomy 3:11.
yeah,
But it says it was decorated with iron and was 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide.
yeah.
So
Right. But Brian's saying that Heiser says that's the same dimensions of Marduk's bed.
Oh, you don't know about Marduk's measurements.
Right.
Gotcha. Oh, I thought you didn't know about the measurements of Og's bed.
No, he knew Og's, but then Heiser claims like, well,
Got
yeah,
it.
but the same as the god Marduk.
Got it.
Right. And
And-
Marduk, of course, Marduk was the storm god, was the chief god of the Babylonian pantheon, a storm god. He has a lot of parallels to Baal, to Indra in Hinduism, Zeus, Thor. So like we've kind of talked about this before, like when we've talked about whether the pagan gods were real and in what sense they were real. Like the Prince of Greece is definitely in Daniel 10, where he talks about the Prince of Greece, the Prince of Persia, the great Prince Michael. He is talking about as I understand it, he's talking about the divine council that appears in Psalm 82, where it talks about how God takes his place in the great assembly. He presides over the gods. He tells them that he condemns them for being corrupt, for favoring the mighty against the weak, and for
So why would Marduk not be one of them?
Well,
especially if he's condemned.
Right, but my point is that and these gods are understood to be territorial. Like each nation had their god, and he was the god over that territory of land. Greece had its prince. In Greece, they worship Zeus as the chief god. But he doesn't call the Prince of Greece Zeus. It might be that the Prince of Greece, who was on the Divine Council, maybe he masqueraded as a god who they called Zeus.
Sure.
But if you trace these stories, like you have all these common elements, like you have these recurring motifs across religions, like where Indra and Marduk and Baal, Zeus, Thor, they kind of have the same story told about them, of them doing epic battle with the chaos dragon and becoming the creator. So which would suggest that this is maybe the same story. So does that mean that
it could be as simple as, while they had a certain ability and free latitude to impersonate and misrepresent themselves, they all drew a line at actually restating the actual creation story.
Or
you know what I mean? Like maybe there's some level of honor, or they knew if they went one step too far, they would get stopped. But they knew there was a line of a level of lying that would be tolerated, because and you have to also, like, so in Jubilees, here's a quote from Jubilees 15:31. There are many nations and many people, and they all belong to him, but over all of them he caused spirits to rule, so that they might lead them astray from following him. But over Israel he did not cause any angel or spirit to rule, because he alone is their ruler, and he will protect them. It's almost like when he scattered after Babel, he made a certain allowance for misrepresentation to occur, because they tried so hard to work against him.
Well,
or they fought each other.
He gave them over to their own devices.
That's what I'm saying. He's like, oh, y'all want this?
And they started, struggling for their own borders and their own fighting.
Right, but like I don't have a problem if we think of the Prince of Greece as being, if calling him Zeus. But I think it's, at the same time, I wouldn't think of, the story of Zeus over slaying the dragon Typhon and being the like there's another, like the story of Prometheus. Prometheus was one of the gods of Olympus who rebelled against Zeus by giving fire to man. He's depicted as kind of a hero, but he bears parallels to the devil, to the serpent tempting. So are we going to take this story about Zeus and Prometheus being at odds as being is that a story about actual divine beings, or is it an echo of this earlier story? Because like in the Bible, Baal is identified with Satan. By the time of the New Testament, they're outright calling the devil Beelzebub, recognizing that Baal is not that's not the proper name of this being. That's what they're worshiping as the storm god and creator god is actually the devil leading them astray. And given the parallels between Baal, Thor, Zeus, Indra, basically every storm god, seems like every pagan religion has a storm god that they exalt to the status of creator god. The exceptions would be that prove the rule would be Egypt, because they used irrigation. They were dependent more on irrigation from the Nile than on seasonal rainfall, and Japan, because they're an island nation and they get rain all the time. They don't really get droughts in Japan, at least not enough that they would build a religion around placating their storm god to prevent it, unlike everywhere else in the world dependent on seasonal rainfall. But so there's kind of a line between how did circumstances and human imagination create these stories, and how much of it is actual divine beings deceiving them.
Yes, and yes.
Right. Like it could be all of those at the same time. Like, there
mean,
doesn't have to be a straight line, right? And there doesn't have to be some kind of like, well, we don't have an allocation for this guy over here in this one, so it must not be. It could have just been, it didn't catch on. Like,
but if the sons of God or the host of heaven is described as 10,000 times 10,000 or incountable, and then they talk about a third of them like rebelled, then there would be a bunch of these spirits that came, and the watchers that did these bad deeds that were put away, and the rest of them act like meatloaf, like I would do anything, but I won't do that. And I think they were clever enough to understand that I need to make the humans do these terrible things and blaspheme against God, because I know better, because I just saw my fathers just get put into the abyss forever until they come out in the end of times.
But I want to push back on your math for a second, Dre. I think if I remember the timelines, there's two separate instances of heavenly hosts leaving. So the first chunk with the Watchers, I want to say, is numbered.
I agree with you, and I know where you're going. I just think that they're of the same group. They came down after because they saw the mistake.
They
that
were
the
probably
first
all
group
like
made.
related, or they were buddies, or whatever.
They're part of the same army.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But I think that first tranche was only like 70.
I think it was 200. Was it 200?
I thought they numbered it at 70 because they give a number to the nations.
In the book of Enoch, there are 200 watchers who descend on Mount Hermon,
and they're the ones that make the pact. Is 200.
Right.
No, I was talking
about led by Shami Hazel.
I was talking about the.
But you were talking about the Babel.
Right.
The Babel. The
but
Babel
then
instance was
they're cast. Yeah, they're cast into the abyss, but then he divided the nations according to the number of the sons of God. So there aren't tens of thousands upon thousands of nations.
Well, there's not
at the time, and this is after. And I think there are like 72 nations according to.
I thought there was 70. That's just the number that stuck in my head.
So you think there's only 70 demons, for lack of a better term? They came?
No. So hang on. So there's two different math things going on, right? So what I'm just, this is my head, and I don't know if there's any. 200 came down from Hermon, right? And then they got locked away not before they made Nephilim. So that number's multiplicative. Those demons that were being created were happening at point of union, right? So if 200 demons took 200 women, they might have had more than one Nephilim each.
Yeah,
right. And then there's nothing, we get no discussion about Nephilim, about second generation Nephilim, right? Did Nephilim take other women?
But you have to think that there are,
right?
Because they start shrinking, and they, post Alluvian, and
right.
Well,
and then
we still have them today.
Well, well, let's
the Merovingians.
Let's back up a little bit. The first generation of Nephilim that were fathered from the pact of Mount Hermon, those were destroyed in the flood. Those were gone. But there's a second generation, but then giants start showing up again. By the time the Israelites are entering the promised land, which of course raises questions: where do they come from? And we've talked about this on the show before. I actually wrote Heiser a question and asked him about this, because he deals with the question in, I think, Reversing Hermon, but he lists a series of options. One of which is that they repeated the behaviors that led to the first generation of Nephilim, but he doesn't really. To my best knowledge, Heiser never made the connection between the Tower of Babel and Mount Hermon. He never explicitly said the Tower of Babel is a repetition of Mount Hermon. I kind of thought he was saying that, but then I went back and reviewed it and realized he wasn't. And I realized that because he, in his list of options for where the new Nephilim came from, he doesn't really offer. To me, I think it's obvious because they repeated the behavior. The sacred bed of Marduk was.
Gary Wayne also mentions that Sodom and Gomorrah might have been another location where that happened again.
Seems on brand, yeah. But but yeah.
Let me in. Let us in.
So basically, they repeated the behaviors according to Deuteronomy, the nations were divided according to the numbers of the sons of God, and the nations they had a fixed number of nations in mind when they wrote that was based on Genesis, the table of nations from Genesis 10, which there were 70 or 72, I don't remember exactly, but so there should be 70 members on the sons of God on the Divine Council, who in turn became corrupt and apparently repeated the behaviors of the first generation of Watchers, which led to more Nephilim. And so just like going back to the question of was Baal real? Was Zeus real? The reason I'm hesitant to let that go, I don't think it's a big deal if you think of, the Babylonian, the Prince of Babylon, as being named Marduk. I don't think that's a big deal, but I don't want to agree to that as if to say these stories from pagan mythology are true. There are kind of echoes of truth in them, but what I think is so cool about the Bible being read in kind of as a polemic against this ancient Near Eastern literature is it kind of gives you a model to follow. Like if we believe Jesus rose from the dead, which he did, that vindicates him as the Messiah, and it validates the overall biblical narrative that foretold him, which means the Bible is that's our standard. That's what we take to be the truth. But we understand what it's saying. We understand the truths that it's conveying in light of this conversation in the ancient Near East. We can't just read it on its own without taking into account the broader cultural conversation that's being had. So we can understand what was happening in Genesis 6 in light of what we've now learned only in the past 100 years from the Enuma Elish, the inscriptions in in Baghdad and Babylon and just all the other stuff we've learned about the ancient Near East that tells us about the Apkallus and like what this is a polemic against. That's kind of a model for how do we apply this elsewhere, like, because the Babylonian story isn't, we don't take the Babylonians version of what the Apkallus were and what they did as literal. We take that as kind of a reflection, as an echo of what Genesis 6 talks about. Like they weren't here to help the way the Babylonians
well,
thought.
I mean, but we also say that wasn't help, right? Because we had a whole episode of Cain and his line and all the things he learned from things that he wasn't supposed to learn, right? Which kind of made him, the guy that created the first city, because he learned from the sons of God all these traits. So why wouldn't the Apkallu teach the Babylonians these things so that they'd be really good at war and conquer other nations?
Yeah,
why wouldn't that be true? Like
I agree that
I think that it is. I don't think that we're saying anything different. I don't know if our tone isn't right for you, or if there's
I keep listening to everything that Brian's saying, and he sounds like
that's
he's
what we
like,
said.
there isn't a way that I agree with you, and then he says a whole bunch of words and basically agrees, and then we're like, that's what I said.
I'm agreeing with you with qualifications is all.
I just don't I don't know those qualifications are necessary, because I think we agree with those qualifications.
All right, I guess we can tie it up with, can wrap this up then. We agree on everything.
It's there's more of these gods. It's fun,
right? Right. Yeah, this stuff goes on and on and on, because like I said, just hitting that little thing in where was I, that verse that I hit talking about the Prince of Persia and all of that. I had never read that
Daniel
verse.
10.
Yeah, Daniel 10. Like, that's a wacky thing to read it with the understanding that an angel's talking about the fact that he's struggling fighting some
he needs help
army. He's like, Daniel, bruh, it's tough out there for a G. Like, and you don't think about that in these terms, because you're like, I mean, a bunch of angels would just wipe out a human, army of humans with no problem, because they weren't an army of humans, right? Like, there's just so many things that are buried in the Bible that you don't necessarily notice if you're reading it with, it's that whole thing about your bias as you're going in to read something, and what you're expecting to read versus what you actually read. So, and what's really funny
assuming they read it.
Well, that's a whole different thing, right? But like, when I hit Daniel 10, it's this author in this book, and it's I'm in his footnotes, and he's talking about these things, and he makes it a throwaway. He's like, these angel, these fallen angels were doing battle with Gabriel and Michael, is how he says it. He just goes Daniel 10, and I'm like, the hell are you talking about? So I go and look it up, and I have to read it, and I'm like reading it, I'm like, dude, that's nested in there. It's not like it's just overt that there was this angelic warfare that was happening in real time while humans are running around, and it's like totally unbeknownst to the humans. And Daniel wouldn't have known about it if the angel hadn't gone and told him about it. Right? Like, this angel showed up to tell him, man, I have these rough battles out here with these evil angels.
Daniel wouldn't have known about that particular battle, right? But it seems like that, everything
the angel knew he would know what he was talking about.
Right. It wasn't like
he's aware of this.
Yeah, Daniel didn't go, what?
Daniel's like, oh man, sorry, glad Michael was there to back you up, dog.
Right.
And this ties back to our conversation a couple weeks ago about what did Jesus teach. People read it with that confirmation bias of he's always telling us how to go to heaven when we die. Well, no, he's talking about something entirely different. That's entirely foreign to anything his listeners would have been thinking. But we read it with that confirmation bias. And then if we ever do go back and read the Old Testament, we kind of gloss stuff like that over. And
Hey, Brian, I'm not going to take this conversation there because it doesn't fit where we are. But when we hit stop, I'm going to drag you back. This boy's got a whole page that explains why Jesus said what he said to Nicodemus and what he meant in Matthew 22.
That's so good. That's,
all right.
I always wonder, So David was given 5 smooth stones, right? Or was it
Boy,
4?
he picked him out.
He picked him out not because he thought he was gonna miss, but because Goliath had brothers,
Yeah.
right? So it's curious to me, like he cuts Goliath's head off, and then like his brothers just quit, like did they run away? Like what happened? What happened to those guys? Did they just lose?
They didn't know David could drop bombs like that.
They
They said
probably never saw
Matei,
anything like that before.
and they just like fuck it, I'm out. Like and today is the first time I noticed that David had his own mighty warriors, which led to the question: are there good Nephilim?
Oh, because they called his guys Gibberim.
Gibberim,
Yeah.
right? So, and means that they knew that they were going to be in battle with a bunch of giants over there with the Amorites.
They were about that life.
So, like, well, I'm going to need an army myself to come wreck some stuff, and and he brought his own 30, was it 37, 35, 37 men.
Yeah.
They came that fought with him, and those are also giants, maybe. Or were they all just badasses? But no, they use the Gibberim.
Well, Gibborim doesn't necessarily mean Nephilim. That's just a description.
But it doesn't mean that it doesn't.
Well,
it just means mighty warriors.
It's special forces.
Yeah.
Like they're described in Genesis 6, they described the Nephilim as mighty warriors. It doesn't mean all mighty warriors are Nephilim.
Right. Basically, the Nephilim were Gibberim because they were Nephilim.
Right.
David's dudes were
I don't know, man. I think when we start talking about
just because they were Gibberim.
I don't know.
It's kind of like
you're fighting giants.
So I look at
they're
it like
second,
this.
third generation giants. They're only 11 foot tall and not 40.
It's like in the Marvel universe, right? All of the Avengers have magical powers except the Punisher. He's an
eagle of an anchor. That's his.
He's a superhero
power.
just because he was a Marine. He was a Gibberim. That's the powers he brought to the table. I mean, Hawkeye didn't have any powers. Hawkeye was just a Gibberim, right? There's just some dudes that are just.
Well, I don't like your version.
They're him.
Fuck off.
They were them.
They were all Davids.
Yeah.
They were all.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems to be the through line, is that they were God's people defeated giants because of their faith in God, not because they were themselves giants.
Well, that's boring.
That's where the whole concept of giant killer comes in. Being a giant killer is cooler than just being another giant.
I guess. Yeah.
Dre's just disappointed. He was hoping for a secret line of good giants.
Like just my army of giants coming with me. Like, hey,
I want to give you this. I wish I could. I know I can see how much it means to you.
There's no proof, but there's no proof it isn't. So
all right.
Yes.
Yeah,
I feel like the only reason to say that's not what it is at some point they would have made reference to the fact that they were big also. And I think that's why it makes it more amazing, is that little regular sized dudes were able to kill giants.
I mean, if and this could be true too, because maybe there's only 4 giants. They weren't fighting a whole army of giants.
Maybe he had sisters and they were really fearsome.
It's kind of like what was that?
I don't believe that. I'm kidding.
At the wall in you didn't watch it, Dre. You never watched the Song of Fire and Ice, did you?
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones.
No.
So they at one point they roll up with like 2 giants. You know what I mean? And it's a big deal, but they handle it because they've got weaponry and whatever, and same kind of deal.
Kind of like in 300 when the giants come rolling up.
Yeah.
With the Persian army.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cute. Like now that I see this through the DCW lens, Persia's bringing giants.
Yeah, and my man kept calling himself a god king, and he was a little bigger than everybody else, and
he's like immortals, huh? Let's put him to the test.
In the Bible, Xerxes was a solid dude. He was all right.
Oh yeah,
but not in the 300. Yeah. He wasn't a solid dude to the Greeks.
Yeah. It's true. And he wasn't in the Bible. It's not a 7-foot tall Brazilian drag queen either.
Well, that's boring.
Sorry. Yeah.
I thought the
Well,
Bible was cool. I don't know.
until you heard that Xerxes wasn't a tranny.
You will find I am kind. I might dress up as Xerxes for Halloween.
I don't think you should do it.
You don't think
I
so?
mean,
I
are you
think you
gonna go
should.
historic? Are
I
you
think you
gonna go
should.
historically accurate or 300?
I'm going 300.
All right.
It's just my excuse to take my
Take
shirt off because I
take
live in
pictures.
California where it's warm enough I can do that.
So
All right.
lots of eye makeup, pierce your nipples.
I'm not piercing my nipples, but I
You're
do a
gonna
lot of
go for it, then go
arm
for it, man.
clamps and bracelets and you know, a lot of eye makeup.
There was we talked about the 300 and we're changing gears. I was watching this they were doing a, breaking down the scenes in some different movies, and that sequence in the 300 that we all love, this is Sparta, the kick. But the cool part of the movie, of that sequence, and this is one of my favorite movies, by the way, is right before he does that, right before Leonidas Spartan kicks that dude into the hole,
Well,
he looks at his wife.
I know, yeah, so good.
Because he's like, you know what I'm about to do? And she gives him the nod, like, yep. And the way the guy describes it, he goes, it's not that it was a cool scene. He's like, hey, honey, I'm about to kill this guy. He looks at her and basically says, I'm about to dedicate us to war with these people, and we may all die. And she says, I know, and I expect that from you because you're the king of Sparta.
He was leaning on her counsel.
Yeah.
But that nigga did disrespect me,
Right.
sir.
Right. So but it was just, I love that movie because I love that scene. And then I love the scene when she says goodbye to him when he's leaving.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's the most emotion. It's maybe one of the most singularly emotional sequences in any movie I watch. And it happens every single time I watch it, right? The whole come back with your shield or on it kind of thing. And it's just, first of all, it's so, we've been using this phrase a lot here lately, but it's so on brand for that place, that period, that moment, right? And she could have easily said, don't do it. He'd have been like, all right.
Right.
He would have been like, whoop, like the dude in Princess Bride when he's like, sit. And the guy just like swoops his robe and just plops down. He's like, okay. Right. Like he didn't want to go to war and die. He knew he wasn't coming back. And I think that's a really, anyway, that's a unnecessary.
And how
love that
BA
movie,
she was
but
when he was gone. Like she handled business,
right?
because she handles business.
Yeah.
Because that's what the queen does.
To include I don't want to say accepting, but tolerating a rape and not acting on it until it was time to act on it. Right. Like all the way through that. Like,
so she was wise as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It was there's a lot to unpack in a movie that was kind of designed just to be a visual slugfest. And it was that also.
Right.
I think it's a good memorial to an actual event in history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I just we should go into it with that understanding. It's not meant to be a history lesson. It's meant to be a
an homage,
kind of a monument.
Yeah.
Because the Spartans were kind of monsters. They were a slave state. They were not.
They were not. I mean, they were technically a slave state, but to call them a slave state is not quite as nearly as similar as like pre-antebellum America. It wasn't quite that kind of situation.
It was pretty bad. Like the actual Spartan citizens were full-time warriors, which meant they had an entire
which means they didn't have time to farm.
Yeah,
which means they didn't have time to
or build.
So I guess I'd ask what's your point of reference. So I read the book the Gates of Fire.
The Hot Gates.
Well, no, the title is The Gates of Fire.
Okay.
It was written by Stephen Pressfield.
Okay.
And Stephen Pressfield, by the way, for anybody listening, if you listen to us, you'd probably really enjoy Stephen Pressfield. You too, Brian, you would adore Stephen Pressfield. Dre, it's all on audiobooks. He only writes military historical fiction. Okay.
Cool.
So he writes books about the Peloponnesian War, obviously this war. He writes writes one about Rommel. Um,
Rommel, the Nazi tank guy.
Yeah, and that one's called Killing Rommel, I think is what it's called. But it's written about this. There was a special ops unit, essentially. Basically, the U.S. knew they couldn't beat Rommel, or the Allies knew they couldn't beat Rommel in a straight war. So they sent an SAS team to go assassinate him instead. So the story's about this team trying to go kill Rommel behind the scenes. That's what the whole book's about. But he takes these pieces of history and he writes them in a first person way that makes it really cool. So his book, the Gates of Fire, it was being passed around from the special ops community as like a must read. This is back in 97. And so my brother John had been playing around with the RRT guys in Second Radio. And so they were all reading the book, and it was on the commandant's reading list and all that stuff, right? So he gives me a copy, and he's like, "Hey, this book's being passed around. You probably would dig it." And I actually read it while my son was being born. So the week that I was in the hospital while Carrie was having Austin, I was reading this book. The way the book starts, spoiler alert for anybody that doesn't know, everybody dies at Thermopylae. So the book starts as soon as the battle ends. Like you open the book and it's like everybody's dead. Xerxes wants to know why they didn't take his multiple offers to surrender, because he gave them awesome terms. He gave them better terms than he'd ever given anybody else, and they never accepted. So he tells his people, "You find me somebody who's still alive. I want to talk to them. I need them. I need to have this conversation." They find one dude that's not quite dead. They pull them out and they put him in a tent, and they spend months bringing him back to life. And they finally get him to where he can stand in front of Xerxes, and they take him there. And Xerxes is like, "Spartan, tell me your story." And the first words out of the man's mouth are, "Lord, I am not a Spartan. I would never pretend to tell you what goes on in the heart of a Spartan. All I can do is tell you my story." And that's how the book starts. It's and without
this dude dies, not even a Spartan. I mean, this dude lives.
So without giving too much away, the way his story starts is he's from another city state. It had fallen. And without a city state, you had no citizenry, to Brian's point. And so he ends up in Sparta as a slave, as a nobody. He has no city. And so he picks up as a slave to go work for the Spartans. And so he tells the whole story about him moving through the camp and watching the different Spartans train and everything. So the whole story is first person through the eyes of a slave. And the reason anyway, I don't want to dirty this book. This is one of my top 5 favorite books I've ever read. So I'm not gonna dirty any more of it, but it's a really neat book, and it's real heavy in their training, like how they're agagi and all of that, and like what happens and how they live and how they think and how they act, and then how they went to war, and then why he was still there, all this kind of stuff. But it's a pretty cool story. It doesn't paint an entirely evil picture. Now they do have slaves, no question. But it's definitely not the same kind of vision as you would have of like I said, like 1800s America. Anyway,
I see the Spartans are a lot like samurai. Like we have this like really romanticized view of them as these sort of ideal models of warrior virtue, and it's they have that reputation for a reason, but it also, like, there's also real life to consider.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean,
you sound like the people who live in Oceanside, where the Marines have this warrior spirit lore, but I know the real one. That guy didn't even tip me very well at Olive Garden.
So. I thought about mentioning that, but I figured
the irony was just leave the irony alone. Yeah. No, I mean, at the end of the day, I think
you said samurai. Marines.
We romanticize them because it's a game respect game kind of thing, right? Like the people that romanticize them are the modern day warriors. And who else are we going to look to except the most well-regarded and most successful of the previous warrior generations, right?
Well, samurai, they never really fought anybody besides each other for the most part.
That's
Like
true.
they drove off the Mongols, but that was largely because of weather.
In
You know,
their in their mind, it was the gods. So yeah,
well, yeah, it was the kamikaze, the divine wind.
yeah.
But if that typhoon hadn't come in,
There'd be no Japan.
like it would be like you know, lesser Mongolia.
I'd be a little
uh,
thicker built.
I
Yeah.
I can all I can see in my head is Doctor Strange's buddy. That's all.
Long.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
He played
he played with
Kublai
Marco Polo, and
Uh-huh.
I'm like,
And he was
that's
awesome.
wasn't he?
He was pretty good in that.
Everybody talks about Firefly as the series that ended too abruptly. I need Marco Polo to continue.
Oh, I knew that it ended abruptly, and it still pissed me off.
I didn't,
because I watched it way after.
I watched it way after, but I don't look ahead, so I don't really know what's going on. So I'm just watching this show, and I'm like, wait, what the hell? I was heartbroken. That's a great show. It was a great show.
And then the video game Ghost of Tsushima.
Mm-hmm.
It's you guys know about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the Mongol invasion of Japan. But it deals with the whole like history of it pretty brilliantly. Like they kind of acknowledge and play to the romanticism of the samurai, all the while like the undertone of the story is that, but it's actually BS, and it's like this is the you know, here's they kind of give you what you want if you're coming to a samurai game wanting to play a samurai and enjoy.
Well, why would they have you pay $60 to shit all over your heart and soul if that doesn't make any sense?
But the way the story goes, it kind of like the main conflict is between like he's called the Ghost of Tsushima because he adopts what are, you know, in the story are regarded to be unworthy tactics of a samurai. Like he's doing assassinations and using stealth, and he basically invents ninjutsu. Like the suggestion is that this is where the first ninja came from. It was this samurai, but it's kind of with the wink, like kind of acknowledging that look, that this wasn't how the samurai were, especially in this era. That's the mythology that grew out of the Tokugawa era when they had the samurai had become a fixed class that were kind of like the Spartans living on the backs of the rest of society so they could be full-time samurai, but they weren't like their civil wars were over. They weren't really at war with anybody. So they had this long period where the samurai had to kind of, they created this culture around themselves where they kind of justified the fact that they have all this privilege and they don't really contribute anything besides, you know, their own recreational art. That's where you get this philosophy of the Bushido that they kind of project back on, you know, no samurai will ever surrender or use such and such tactics, but they surrendered all the time. They use dirty tactics all the time.
They lost the eye to Tiger as soon as Tom Cruise came in and just whooped that ass. I mean,
they did.
I mean, Tom Cruise is the greatest samurai ever. So how great could Dakota Bushido be? I mean, but then again, Tom Cruise is the greatest everything ever. So
it's true. Yeah. Which is really kind of a ripoff of Shogun, the James Clavell novel that was adapted into a miniseries.
I'm looking forward to the new version coming out next month.
Which was based on a true story of
Tom Cruise,
of William Adams, who he was an English pilot for a Dutch merchant fleet that they were trying to go to the New World, but they got waylaid by the Spanish, and they wound up barely making it to Japan, where he became a retainer to Tokugawa Ieyasu, the first shogun and the namesake of the Tokugawa era. But you know, it's funny how I you know, this episode is about mythology and and how the true story that we find in the Bible relates to it. But it's funny that we wound up here, because like growing up in the 80s, I idolized samurai and ninja, and I trained in Japanese martial arts of all kinds, and I had this romanticized view that I took very seriously, while I wasn't taught any real history in school. I became a Christian. I kind of became interested in world history. I kind of abandoned all that in favor of, I was basically a Buddhist from all of my my martial arts training and my fascination with Eastern culture, which I abandoned when I became a Christian. But like learning more about it, it's just the actual history of it has kind of cured me of that romanticism. Like if it hadn't been for the American Commodore Matthew Perry forcing them to modernize, they probably would have been conquered by the Chinese, or somebody else, or some other Western power would have taken over and forced them to bend to their ways.
At the end of the day, I mean, if we were to, it's almost like we were told by one General Flynn that all dynasties come to an end, right? It's just a matter of time.
I mean, if I never went to First Radio Battalion, I wouldn't know that Marines were pussies. So,
how dare you?
I love you guys.
But
you
I mean,
take that, Gunny Bundy.
Oh, is he a First Radio guy?
Yeah.
Oh. Woof.
So did we cover all the bases on the mythology thing?
We probably didn't, but we at least got in there and poked around a little bit, and
it'll come up again, no doubt.
Up. Oh yeah, for sure. I'm sure it will.
I would just reiterate that, like, the master key, like, to anybody listening who hasn't watched Ancient Apocalypse, watch it. But also, like, read Heiser's stuff, Reversing Herman, Unseen Realm, and kind of get a sense for how the Bible interacts with ancient Near Eastern culture, kind of what the conversation is. And that makes for a pretty good kind of model for interpreting other mythologies around the world. And like all of these elements, they repeat themselves. They show up all over the place. And you really can't, it's hard to explain how that's the case if there isn't some kernel of truth at the bottom of it. But so that sums up all of my thoughts on the topic. And don't let your kids grow up to be samurai.
Mamas. Don't let your kids grow
samurai.
up to be samurai.
Eat sushi.
Hey. But read this book, everybody. Go check this new author out if you want a fun read about on the same topic. This dude right here. It's fun read.
Right on.
And it's only 300 pages. 300
is that it?
Pages. Yeah. I mean, it's big, so it's not super thick, right? It's like, it's not tiny print. You're not reading Atlas Shrugged or something. It's readable. I read this on 2 flights, like to and from wherever I just went.
Oh, right on. So, hey, thanks everybody. Thanks for sticking around. And we'll go ahead and stay enlightened, stay curious, and we'll see you next week. God bless.